A good start will always help you get accurate results from your hand plane, especially if you are a beginner. Today I'm going to be showing you the simple method that I use to set up my own hand planes even before I start using them to get the result I want. How's it? My name is Dylan and welcome to another edition of Ply Creations. This is the fourth video in my hand plane basic series, and in this one I'm going to show you my routine setup that I use on my hand planes before I start working with them every single day. So note, this is not a video about fettling a hand plane or tuning a hand plane. This is just the routine setup that I go through so that I can simply pick up my hand plane the next morning or whenever I start using it again. Or when I sharpen it, I go through the same procedure, by the way. Just pick up my hand plane and carry on. So it gives me the best possible opportunity to get accurate results. It's a really simple method, not claiming it to be my own. I learned this from Paul Sellers. Many of you watching my video now will know who he is. If you do not, find his channel on YouTube. Won't be sorry, and make sure you do subscribe. As I mentioned, this is my routine way that I set up my hand planes, and I do so every time after I sharpen. And I like to sharpen my tools when I finish off for the day, just to have them ready for the next day. That is, of course, when discipline allows me to do that. 90% of the time I do. There are times that I don't, but every time after I sharpen a hand plane, I go through this procedure of setting up the hand plane. So join me at the bench and I'll quickly show you how I go about setting up. By the way, if you watch until the end of the video, I have a bonus demo that you may find interesting, but I'm not going to share more about that now. Join me at the bench. What I did forget to mention, that your setup always starts with a sharp blade. So I will typically sharpen a blade and I will always do the setup, even if I carry on working with a plane or if it goes into storage for my next working session. First of all, I'm going to quickly show you how I get the blade and chip rake back into the plane. So place it into the mouth, and then what I like to do is eyeball each side to make sure I've got equal amount of space open between the body of the plane and the blade. I also want my lateral adjuster to be in a neutral position, which means that gives me maximum movement left to right to be able to do the lateral adjusting. Then I place the chip rake and I try not to move the blade position laterally. The next step is a little bit tricky to show you on camera, and it's something you need to do yourself and have a look at. I'll try and do macro photos and see if I can show you on the screen what that looks like. But you lift up the hand plane, and now I feed the blade out from the hand plane and I look at it from the top, and what I'm looking for is to see a fine black line that appears as the blade exits from the mouth. A light background is always helpful, so my benchtop here is rather light. Otherwise you can use a piece of paper, any light background that will help you visualize the blade as it exits from the plane. Sometimes you'll have dust on the hand plane that makes it tricky to see. I like to sometimes wipe the sole with my hand. Just be careful that you do from the heel to the toe and not the other way around, because if your blade is protruding, you may need a plaster. With the plane in this position, I start feeding the blade out of the body of the plane. I had it very close to coming out of the plane, and I can already see a darkish line appear. What I can see is that this corner of the blade on my right hand side is protruding further than the other side. So now I use my lateral adjuster, as I showed you during our last video, to pull this corner back into the body of the plane. Remember, push the lateral adjuster in the direction of where the corner is making the deeper cut. I'm using the lateral adjuster, get it nice and even. Remember, very small adjustments. Once I'm happy that the blade looks parallel to the sole, I retract the blade back into the body. Take up the backlash, and as I'm turning the depth adjusting wheel, I can see the blade disappear. Next step is we are going to be feeding the blade out so we can start getting a cut. Now we have to take up the backlash again until the yoke engages with a recess in the chib brake, and I know that any further turns I might take now will feed the blade out from under the sole. Now get the paper out of the way. Push the plane over the workpiece while feeding the blade into the cut, getting a deeper cut. There I can feel it catch, and we are now getting a cut. Make sure. And we're getting a nice cut, and that whistling sound you're hearing is telling you that the blade is sharp. Very little in the world sounds as good as that. So I am getting a cut. Now I want to check that my lateral adjustment was accurate, and I do that by placing the plane first over on the right hand side of the workpiece, and I'm getting a cut on the left side of the plane. Moving over to the other side, I'm also getting a cut on the right hand side, but it's not as thick, the shaving, as it is on this side. So I might be taking a cut that's too deep here. Push the lateral adjuster towards my left will alleviate that cut. Very slight movement. Still getting a cut on the right hand side. And I'm getting very much a similar cut and consistency as far as the shaving goes. And that will tell me that my lateral adjustment is ballpark where I want it, and I can do fine adjustments as I start processing lumber. We can then play around. I'm feeding the blade back into the body of the of the plane. I'm not getting any cuts. Very slight adjustment out. We're starting to get a cut, and there we get nice fine shavings. And it's fun to play and see how fine the shavings are that you get. Of course, you'll blunt your blade in the process. The piece of wood that I have clamped here is pine. In South Africa we call it white pine or construction lumber. The thickness is roughly around about 3/4 of an inch, so let's say about 20 mils thick. The reason I like white pine and would suggest that you use a soft species when doing the setup is it does two things. The first is that softwoods are very unforgiving for a blade that is not sharp. If I get a clean cut with a nice sheen on the surface and I cannot feel any roughness, that means my blade is sharp. So the species is telling me that my blade is sharp. The second thing is I'm also feeling on the wood if I can feel any lines or grooves. That will tell me that my plain blade may be nicked or it's got slight serrations, and that's not leaving me a clean surface. So apart from this showing me my parallel adjustment on my hand plane, it also tells me the quality of the edge that I have on my hand plane. And that, in short, is how I set up my hand planes. When I'm done, I will typically retract the blade, so it goes back into the body, and I will take up the slack. So when I start using it, I know that any turn that I make on the depth adjuster will be setting the blade up for a cut without needing to take the slack away. Also, all my hand planes, when I'm done with them for the day, I like to give them a coat of oil. Again, not my idea. This is also from Paul Sellers. This is what he calls a rag in the can. You'll find it on the internet how he makes it. And I always add a light coat of oil. We struggle with rust, and that makes sure that my plane is ready for use when I pick it up again. As promised, on to today's bonus content, and I'd like to show you how I go about setting up one of these wooden hand planes. This is the very first one that I built. It is made from a species called Rhodesian teak, also known in some circles as Zimbabwe teak. My hand plane collection is growing steadily, with the wooden hand planes slowly but surely overtaking my metal bodied hand planes, because I've taught myself how to build these, not only the hand plane but also making my own blades. So I have no excuse for not having any one of the planes that I may need in my workshop. Let me first say is they are a little bit trickier to set up than a metal bodied plane, so not necessarily ideal for beginners, but anyone who has spent time with a well set up, well built wooden hand plane would probably agree that there is very little that compares to using one of these on a day-to-day basis. And I'm quickly going to show you how I set one of these up. To do that, I'm using a hammer that is used for setting up, Japanese hand planes. Almost forgot what this is used for, and it's got a brass head. First of all, I place my hand below the hand plane and I force my fingertips into the hand plane. So what that will do is it will lift the cutting edge above the sole by resting on my fingertips. Careful not to move my fingertips along the cutting edge, because that will cut me. With the blade resting on my fingertips, I then install the wedge. Push in the wedge, and that will then stop the plane blade from just falling out. While having my fingertips at the bottom of the sole, I tap the blade until I can feel the blade coming forward and out from the bottom of the sole. I'm going to tap the wedge so I have a little bit more resistance. I'm now feeling which end or which side of the plane blade is protruding more than the other, similar to what you would do with a lateral adjustment. I don't think the cutting edge is protruded past the sole yet, so I'll give it another tap. I think that will take a cut, and this side feels deeper, or the blade is coming out further on my left hand side than on my right, and I simply move the blade over by tapping the top. See if I can get it even. Every time I tap the blade, I always make sure that I tap the wedge, just to ensure that nothing is jarred loose and that everything is held together. I'm using my fingers to feel where the blade is. You can take the plane, turn it upside down and have a look as you would do with a metal plane down the sole to see where the blade is, but I'm too afraid that the blade will come out and fall on my concrete workshop floor. So next thing to do is take a test cut. And that's a relatively deep cut. Best way to ease up on the depth of the cut, especially if you are a beginner on these hand planes, is to retract the blade completely and start again. These hand planes, you can either tap the front or the back to bring the blade back, or push it back down for a deeper cut. And just like with the metal hand planes, every single one of these has its own personality. So whereas one of the planes I tap in the back to bring the blade back, on another hand plane, if I tap the back, the blade goes a little bit deeper. So that is a relatively heavy cut. So just wiggle everything loose, make sure the wedge is in place, and go through the same process. And take a test cut. And then my test piece slips. And that's roughly how you go about setting up one of these, and you go through a similar process than you would do with a metal bodied hand plane. And as you can hear from the cuts that I am taking, it's brilliant. And looking at the surface of my test piece, it's leaving even a better finish than my number 5. And that's it. That's how I set up my metal bodied hand planes and wooden hand planes, as a bonus to give you the best possible chance to get the most accurate results when you pick up your hand plane and start flattening and squaring up stock. I really do hope that helps. This is also, as I think I mentioned earlier, episode number 4 in my hand plane basic series. Next time I see you, I'll probably be showing you how I go about service and maintaining my hand planes. The series is probably about halfway through. Keep an eye on my channel for more videos. As always, thank you so much for joining me in my workshop. Enjoy using your hand planes, and until I see you again next time, have a good one. Cheers.